The world is full of unsolved mysteries. From ancient civilizations and extraterrestrial activity to bizarre phenomena nobody can explain. These are 20 unexplainable mysteries that will blow your mind. 20. The ship with nobody aboard. On the 7th of November, 1872, the Mary Celeste sailed out of New York Harbor bound for Genoa. Aboard her were Captain Benjamin Briggs, his wife Sarah, their 2-year-old daughter Sophia, and 8 crewmen. 28 days later, a British ship called the Dei Gratia found her drifting under full sail, 400 miles east of the Azores. Every one of those 11 people was gone, and the state she was found in is what makes this impossible. The ship was undamaged. She still carried 6 months of food and water. Nothing had been stolen. The only thing missing was a single lifeboat, which means those people got into it and left on purpose, in the middle of the open Atlantic. The last log entry had been written 9 days earlier, 6 miles off an island in the Azores, close enough to see land. So after everyone climbed into that boat, the Mary Celeste sailed herself for over a week, hundreds of miles, with nobody on deck. This is where the details start fighting each other. Briggs took his sextant, his chronometer, and the ship's papers. That is not panic. That is a man with time to think, leaving in an orderly way. But one of the 2 pumps had been taken apart, and there were 3.5 feet of water in the hold. Alarming to a captain, certainly. Nowhere near enough to sink her. And she had form. She was not born the Mary Celeste. She was launched as the Amazon and renamed only after a run of accidents that spooked everyone who sailed her. Whatever those 11 people saw, they judged it worse than the open ocean. Nobody has ever worked out what it was. The sea was not finished with her either. She sailed another 12 years under a string of owners until her last captain ran her onto a reef in Haiti on purpose for the insurance money. And it only gets stranger from here, because the next mystery is not a missing crew. It is a face that should not exist. 19. The Shroud of Turin. The Shroud of Turin is a piece of linen about 14 feet long, and burned into it is the faint image of a bearded man with wounds that match the crucifixion. Carbon dating in the late 1980s put the cloth at roughly 700 years old, which should have ended the argument, but it did not. An international team studied it in 1978 with the best equipment of the day and came away with no clear explanation for how the image got onto the fabric. It is not painted, there are no brush strokes, and no color soaked into the threads. The image sits on the very surface of the fibers, and nobody has ever managed to copy it. The Catholic Church has never officially called it real, and has never called it fake either. They simply say it is a matter for science, and science has not managed to close it. But the shroud is just one image nobody can account for. The next mystery is 200 pages of them, and not a single person has ever read a word. 18. The book nobody can read. The Voynich manuscript was written in Central Europe in the 15th century, and in 600 years, not one person has been able to read a single line of it. It is filled with looping handwriting in letters that match no known language, wrapped around drawings of plants that do not exist, and star charts nobody can place. There are pages of naked women bathing in green pools connected by pipes. Nobody knows what those are meant to show either. Code breakers have tried it. Wartime code breakers who cracked enemy messages for a living have tried it. Modern computers have been thrown at it. Every single attempt has failed. The letters follow patterns that look like real language, which is the part that keeps people coming back. Either it is the cleverest code ever written, or it is a fake that has outlived everyone who could own up to it. At least, the book is still here to study. The next one is a whole village that walked off the map. 17. The colony that walked away. In 1587, 117 men, women, and children landed on Roanoke Island and started building a settlement. Their governor sailed back to England for supplies. When he finally returned, the entire colony was gone. Not destroyed, not burned, not scattered in a fight. Gone. There was no sign of a struggle anywhere on the island. No bodies, no graves, no burnt timber. The houses had been taken apart carefully, the way you dismantle something you intend to rebuild elsewhere. Whatever happened, it was not sudden and it was not violent. They left one word behind, carved into a post at the edge of the settlement: Croatoan. That was the name of a nearby island and the people who lived on it. Every theory about those 117 colonists rests on that single word, and not one has ever been proven. They left something behind. The two men in the next mystery came back with nothing but a story nobody believed. 16. The night on the Pascagoula River. In October 1973, two men were fishing on the Pascagoula River in Mississippi when they heard a whirring sound behind them. Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker said they turned and saw an oval object hanging above the water with two flashing blue lights. Then, they said, 3 figures came out of it. Both men said they were fully conscious the whole time and completely unable to move. They walked into the county sheriff's office that same night and reported it, which is not what people do with a made-up story. Neither of them ever changed a word of it for the rest of his life. The sheriff did something clever. He left the two men alone in a room with a hidden recorder running, expecting them to drop the act. They did not. Alone together, with nobody listening as far as they knew, they talked about it exactly the way they had to his face. That is two men saying something came down to them. Number 15 is the night something answered from the other direction. 15. The signal that lasted 72 seconds. On August 15, 1977, a radio dish in Ohio picked up a signal from deep space, from the direction of Sagittarius. It was strong, it was clean, and it lasted 1 minute and 12 seconds. When astronomer Jerry Eamon looked at the printout, he circled the reading and wrote one word beside it: Wow. That is now its official name, the Wow signal. And in nearly 50 years of listening, nothing has ever repeated it. The same telescope swept that patch of sky again and again. Other telescopes have searched it in the decades since. Whatever sent it spoke once for 72 seconds and then went quiet forever. A signal you cannot trace is one thing. 5 men who drove into the mountains and never drove back out is worse. 14. The 5 who drove into the mountains. On February 24, 1978, 5 friends from Yuba City, California, drove to a college basketball game. All 5 had mild disabilities, and all of them lived at home. Their families called them the boys. They left the game and never came home. Days later, the car turned up 70 miles in the wrong direction, on a snowy mountain road deep in a national forest, nowhere near any route home. The car was undamaged, it had fuel in it, and it could have been driven straight out of the snow. They had simply left it and walked into the mountains in winter clothing meant for a basketball game. When the snow melted in June, a motorcyclist found Ted Wire's body in a Forest Service trailer 20 miles from the car. It held food and heating fuel. He had a full beard, meaning he had survived in there for weeks, and he had lost around 100 pounds. 3 more were found scattered in the woods. Gary Mathias has never been found. And if you are wondering how 5 grown men can vanish in a forest, wait until you hear what was hiding under one. 13. The cities under the Amazon. For centuries, explorers went into the Amazon hunting for lost cities, and a lot of them never came out. In 1925, British explorer Percy Fawcett walked into the jungle looking for a place he called Zede and vanished with his son. Everyone assumed he had chased a fantasy. The soil there was supposed to be too poor to feed a big population. Then researchers flew over the Bolivian Amazon, firing lasers down through the canopy, and the trees disappeared from the images. Underneath was a city, huge stone platforms, pyramids, raised roads running for miles between towns, fed by a web of reservoirs and canals. It had been sitting under the trees for 600 years, while everyone insisted it could not exist. Fawcett was not chasing a fantasy after all, and nobody knows what happened to him. That one was buried by trees. The next was buried on purpose, and it has been killing people ever since. 12. The pit that eats money. On a small island off Nova Scotia, there is a hole that people have been digging into since the 18th century, and it has killed 6 of them. The story goes that 3 teenagers found a depression in the ground in 1795 and started digging. They hit a layer of oak logs. They dug further and hit another and another. Every serious dig since has hit the same thing, and every one has ended the same way, with the shaft flooding faster than any pump can empty it. 6 people have died trying. The water always wins. Items have come out of that ground, and carbon dated to hundreds of years old, which is enough to keep everyone coming back. Theories run from pirate gold to Shakespeare's manuscripts to the Ark of the Covenant. In more than 200 years of digging, nobody has ever reached the bottom. So that is a hole that will not give anything up. Now here is a sound that will not stop. 11. The station that never stops buzzing. Somewhere in a forest north of Moscow, there is a rusting tower, and it has been transmitting a buzzing tone into the air for over 40 years. It is called UVB-76, and shortwave listeners know it as the buzzer. It sends out between 21 and 34 buzzes a minute, day and night, and it has almost never stopped. Every few weeks the buzzing breaks, and a voice reads out a short string of numbers and Russian names. Then the buzzing comes straight back. It ran straight through the fall of the Soviet Union, through 2 wars in Chechnya, the collapse of the ruble, and the rise of Putin. Governments changed, borders moved, and the buzzing never stopped. Whatever it is for, nobody outside Russia has ever been told, and it is broadcasting right now. That station has never once been interrupted. A television signal in Chicago was not so lucky. 10. The face that hijacked Chicago. On the night of November 22, 1987, the signal of a Chicago TV station cut out during the evening news and was replaced by a figure in a rubber mask. It lasted about 17 seconds before engineers wrestled the tower back. 2 hours later, it happened again on another station, during an episode of Doctor Who, and this time, nobody was on duty to stop it. The masked figure rambled for 90 seconds, moaning and laughing in front of a spinning metal panel. It ended with someone spanking him with a fly swatter while he screamed. Then the feed cut, and Doctor Who came back as if nothing had happened. Overpowering a broadcast tower takes serious equipment and serious skill, and whoever did it walked away clean. In nearly 40 years, the FBI has never identified a single person involved. He wanted to be seen. The man in the next mystery wanted the exact opposite, and he hid a fortune to prove it. 9. The code that buries a fortune. In the 1880s, a pamphlet appeared containing 3 coded texts, and whoever wrote it claimed they marked the location of a buried treasure in Virginia. One is supposed to give the location. One lists what is buried. One names the owners and their families, so the treasure could be handed back. Only the middle one has ever been cracked, using the Declaration of Independence as the key. It describes gold, silver, and jewels worth tens of millions of dollars today. The other 2 have never been broken. Treasure hunters have spent lifetimes and fortunes on that hillside, and a few have gone to prison for digging where they had no right to dig. Nothing has ever been found. That treasure may not even exist. What a farmer in China pulled out of a pond definitely does. 8. The caves nobody wrote down. In the summer of 1992, a farmer in Longyou, China, decided to drain a pond near his village to make it bigger. He pumped the water out and found a room. Not a cave, a chamber cut by hand, more than 100 feet high, with flat walls and pillars holding up a sloping ceiling. The villagers drained the ponds around it and found another. Then another. There are at least 24 of them. Every surface is covered in the same carved marks, narrow parallel lines running unbroken from the ceiling to the floor, cut at exactly the same angle in every single chamber. They are believed to be over 2,000 years old. Cutting that much stone would have taken hundreds of people years, and no Chinese record anywhere mentions it. No tools, no writing, no bones, and no trace of the mountain of rock that came out of the ground. Stone at least sits still and waits to be explained. The next mystery moved through a city and killed people while they danced. 7. The summer a city danced itself to death. On July 14, 1518, a woman named Frau Trophäa stepped into a street in Strasbourg and began to dance. There was no music and no festival. She simply danced. She kept going until she collapsed, slept, and then got up and started again on swollen, bleeding feet. Within a week, more than 30 people had joined her. Within a month, there were around 400. Then, the authorities made it worse. Physicians decided the cure was to let the sickness run its course, so the city built a wooden stage, hired a band, and paid professional dancers to keep the afflicted company. People danced until their hearts gave out. By some accounts, several were dying every day through that August. 6 separate records from the time describe it, and 500 years later, nobody can say what caused it. Hundreds of witnesses and no answer. Now try a mystery with 130 pieces of evidence and still no answer. 6. The objects. Rome never mentioned. Since 1739, more than 130 small bronze objects have been dug up across northwest Europe, and nobody has any idea what they are. Each one is a hollow 12-sided shape, about the size of a golf ball or an orange. Every side is a 5-sided panel with a round hole in the middle, and every hole is a different size. At each corner sits a small knob. They took real skill to make. Several have been dug up buried alongside piles of coins, which means whoever owned them treated them as valuable. People have guessed measuring tools, religious objects, even knitting aids. None of the guesses hold up because no two of them are the same size. The strangest part is the silence. In all of Roman writing, across the entire empire, not one text or drawing mentions them. An empire that wrote down everything said nothing about these. From here on, the mysteries stop being old and start being personal. 5. The man who jumped into the storm. On November 24, 1971, a man calling himself Dan Cooper boarded a Boeing 727 in Portland, wearing a business suit and carrying a briefcase. He handed a note to a flight attendant saying he had a bomb. He asked for $200,000 and 4 parachutes. He got both. The plane landed in Seattle, the passengers were released, and Cooper ordered the crew to take off again and fly low and slow toward Mexico. Somewhere over the forests of southwest Washington, in freezing rain and darkness, he lowered the rear stairs and jumped with the money strapped to him. He was never seen again. In 1980, a boy digging on a riverbank found a rotting bundle of the ransom cash, still banded. That is the only physical trace anyone has ever recovered of Dan Cooper. The FBI worked the case for 45 years and closed it unsolved. He took money and left. The next man took lives and then wrote to the newspapers about it. 4. The killer who wrote to the papers. Between 1968 and 1969, someone murdered at least 5 people in Northern California, mostly young couples parked in quiet places at night. Then he started writing letters to newspapers, taunting police and demanding his messages be printed on the front page. Or he would go on a killing spree. He signed them with a crossed circle and called himself the Zodiac. He sent ciphers too, and dared the newspapers to print them. One stood unbroken for 51 years until 3 amateur codebreakers cracked it in 2020. After half a century of waiting, it turned out to say nothing useful at all. He claimed 37 victims in total, and police have never confirmed how many were really his. He was never caught and never identified, and around 1974, he simply stopped writing. It remains the most famous unsolved murder case in America. He wrote in code that people eventually broke. The next mystery is writing that nobody will ever break. 3. The writing on Easter Island. Easter Island sits thousands of miles from anywhere, and it is famous for its enormous stone heads. But a missionary who arrived in 1864 found something stranger. Wooden tablets covered in rows of tiny carved symbols, birds, fish, plants, and human shapes. The lines reverse direction every row, so to read it, you have to physically turn the tablet upside down at the end of each one, over and over. It is called Rongo-rongo, and it is the only writing system ever developed anywhere in Polynesia. Only a couple of dozen pieces survive. Nobody can read it, and the reason is brutal. The islanders who could were taken in slave raids and killed by disease within a generation of that missionary landing. The meaning went with them. Whatever those tablets say about the collapse of that society, they are still saying it, and nobody alive can hear it. That is a language with nobody left to speak it. The next one is 10 letters in English that nobody can read either. 2. The 10 letters on the monument. In the grounds of an English country estate stands an 18th century stone monument, carved with a mirror image of a famous painting of shepherds around a tomb. Beneath it, someone cut 10 letters into the stone. D-O-U-O-S-V-A-V-V-M. Nobody knows what they mean. Charles Dickens looked at it. Charles Darwin looked at it. Wartime codebreakers from Bletchley Park have looked at it. And none of them produced an answer anyone accepts. The staff at the hall say they get 5 or 6 people a week arriving, convinced they have cracked it. They have heard so many confident solutions over the years that they no longer believe a single one. 10 letters on a stone is a puzzle you can walk away from. The last mystery on this list is a place people walked into and never walked out of. 1. The island called No Return. And the one nobody has ever explained sits in Lake Turkana in northern Kenya. The local name for it is Envitanet, which means no return. A community lived on that island and crossed to the mainland regularly to trade. Then one day, the crossings stopped. 2 men went out to check on them. They found the place completely deserted, with burned-out huts and fish left rotting where they lay. No bodies, no boats missing, nothing taken. In 1935, a British expedition camped nearby, and 2 of its members, Martin Shefflin and Bill Dyson, went across to the island to look around. They were never seen again. A search party went after them and found nothing. A plane flew over and saw nothing. 2 men vanished on a small island in a lake in daylight, while people were actively looking for them, and no trace of either has ever been found. From empty ships to unreadable books, to an island that people simply do not come back from, every one of these has been picked over by experts, and every one of them is still open. So, tell me in the comments which of these you think has an answer waiting, and which one you believe will never be solved. And if any of them kept you thinking longer than it should have, that is exactly why they have lasted this long.